this afternoon we are going to be seeing two presentations, each of which will be introduced by the member of the faculty responsible for them. Before I hand over to the first one, could I ask everybody physically present in the room to make sure that their phones are turned to silent so we don't get any interruptions. So without any more ado, the first presentation is by the Mars Team project. I'm going to hand over to Professor Hugh Hill, who was the faculty interface for that project. Professor Hill.
Thank you, Professor Welch. Today, Mars is a dry, arid planet. Why would anybody want to go to this horrendous, uninteresting environment? Well, in fact, that's what the TP MarsNOW people will be addressing. They'll be presenting to you this scenario. Not just that, but they will consider a one-way mission to Mars in the ISU tradition of international, intercultural, and interdisciplinary. TP MarsNOW, very, very good luck.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very special team project presentation here at the International Space University in Strasbourg, France. We welcome those of you who are joining us today in the Boeing Auditorium, as well as those who are joining us via webcast all around the world. My name is Dallas Kazabuski, a space engineer from Canada, and I will be your host, your guide, leading you through this exciting hour on the topic of one-way missions to Mars. Along with me today, I will have several other presenters, including Sabrine, Jose, Cece, and Ram, who you'll meet in a few moments in this presentation, along with the rest of our MarsNOW team, which composes 17 professionals from 16 different nations, engineers, medical doctor, an architect, and even an expert in international relations. Before we go much further, I'd like to express our sincere gratitude and appreciation for our sponsors at NASA, as well as the continuous support of the ISU faculty and community. Now a little context into one-way missions to Mars. Mars has been seen as the next step in human space exploration since humans took that one small step on the moon decades ago. This feature of the article from the London Times in 1969 was printed the day that astronauts landed on the moon. However, after all this time, we still haven't landed on Mars. NASA has iterated their design through several mission architectures, updating them with technologies, new policies, and different objectives. The European Space Agency's Aurora program outlines Mars as the prime but distant target of a human spaceflight program. Finally, 11 countries have come together to form the Global Exploration Roadmap, which outlines their desire to visit other celestial bodies, including the Moon, asteroids, and eventually Mars. These programs have four things in common. The first is that they are governmentally conducted and designed and controlled. The second expresses their desire to go to the red planet, as is obvious. The third outlines the technological implications and feasibility in doing so. And the final is to return the crew home at the conclusion of the mission. It is important to note that all human spaceflight endeavors have been planned with this return element in mind. However, recent developments in the commercial space industry have prompted new ideas and participants in the quest for Mars, most notably Mars One. Announced in 2012, Mars One is a private organization based in the Netherlands who plan to settle Mars through the use of one-way missions, where humans will travel to and live on Mars for the duration of their lives. They plan on sending the first humans to land in 2025, and their call for astronauts garnered international attention when they received over 200,000 applications, showing the desire to send humans to Mars is great and international. Their plans are ambitious, and they promote new ideas for discussion concerning this relatively new concept in human space exploration, namely the one-way mission. The first task afforded to the MarsNOW team was in defining what is a one-way mission, and what would a one-way mission to Mars entail. For our purposes, a one-way mission to Mars defines a mission where humans are sent to the red planet, they land, and they live out the rest of their lives, never to return. Such a definition and its implementation bring up interesting consequences and design challenges which we will explore further in this presentation. In order order to understand the feasibility of this definition and of this concept, we looked at the historical context. While one-way missions have never occurred in space, they have actually occurred here on Earth, just with a different name. Australia was greatly populated by an influx of people traveling far from their homes to land in Australia, never to return. Additionally, the Americas, including Canada, my home country, was colonized by an influx of people sailing from the old world to the new. After reviewing this historical context and understanding that the challenges and the difficulties facing these missions, we realized that there would be even greater challenges involved with sending humans to Mars, but perhaps new opportunities as well. We reviewed the literature, we reviewed the policies and the reference architectures mentioned earlier, and we came up with the following key assumptions. The first is that return missions will be conducted first. The technology that is required to send people to and land and live safely on the red planet should be tested out thoroughly before one-way missions are planned or conducted. And they should be done through return missions, which our spaceflight agencies are most familiar with. The second assumption is that the early stage of a one-way mission, if conducted, will require resupply from Earth in the means of technology, people, supplies, and perhaps other equipment. The third assumption is that the one-way mission population will be controlled. All human spaceflight endeavors have a crew capacity based on engineering and mission design. And we see no reason why a one-way mission to Mars will begin in any other way. Finally, the most important assumption for the MarsNOW team, the one which drove our team forward and allowed us to provide unique insights into one-way mission design. And that is that one-way missions would eventually lead to a settlement. If one-way missions are to be conducted, they will require long-term support and commitment. And if we follow the motivations that humans have to advance our species and add to our capabilities, we believe that one-way missions will not be a one-time occurrence. If this is the case, the only way to stop a drain on Earth's resources through supporting a one-way mission would be in the development of a self-sustainable Martian settlement. This assumption drives our entire body of work. Once we realized that one-way missions lead to a settlement, all other considerations fell in place. We analyzed sustainability models and adopted one from the University of Michigan, tailoring it to suit the needs of one-way missions to Mars. As you can see here, our sustainability model encompasses three spheres of influence, namely the environmental, the social, and the economical. After reviewing all of the design characteristics of human missions to Mars, and considering them specifically for one-way missions, we realized that there was a vast amount of literature devoted to the environmental and technological challenges, but very few articles or sources for development on understanding the social and economical challenges. MarsNOW team has taken it upon ourselves to look at these underdeveloped aspects and to try to emphasize their importance for mission success. We believe, and you shall see throughout this presentation, that the ethical and legal challenges, team selection and training, habitat site selection, habitat and technology, and issues such as governance and outreach are just as critical and vital to the success of a human mission to Mars as is the technology. And with that in mind, I would like to introduce Severin to begin our social aspects into the legal and ethical considerations of one-way missions.
Thank you, Dallas. I'm Sylvain Van Oppen from Belgium, and I'm a mechanical engineer. So, human Mars missions, and certainly one-way human Mars missions, will arise many controversial ethical questions. The MarsNOW methodology to deal with those questions was to ask tough questions that have been addressed, but not developed so far. We try to make recommendations where possible and list limitations as a roadmap for further development. When looking at those ethical challenges and considerations, different questions can be formed. What if the mission fails? Who can go? What about Martian life? When can we go? What are the cultural dimensions of an international Mars mission? Such as search for answers and knowledge, for advancement of human capabilities, or making new perspectives for the future to assure unlimited progression and potential for the growth of human species and eventually need for the survival of humanity. The opportunities also for the Mars missions will be possible spin-offs in multiple disciplines on Earth, as well as the long-term commitment that will be needed to pursue our motivations throughout the whole mission. The MarsNOW recommendations for that is to plan, have a really extreme planning, participation and commitment throughout the whole mission, and also make sure that it will be an international cooperation rather than a single nation effort. So now that we know that now that we know why we should go, let's look at when should we go. The MarsNOW team believes that we should go when we have a better understanding of the risks and the aspects of long-duration missions, and also when we will be able to overcome the obstacles and providing necessary support throughout the whole duration of the mission. So, summarized, when should we go is when we have sent people to Mars and when we were able to bring them back safely, then only we can start a settlement. Now, after when and why, we need to know who we will send. The MarsNOW team believes that we will need, as first settlers, a highly trained, international, intercultural, interdisciplinary team that will make the foundation of the settlement. They will make sure that it is feasible to survive on Mars and live correctly before we will send other, like the further settlements. These settlers will be adults, children, families, and the fact that those people will be everyday people will arise different ethical concerns that will have to be dealt with before we can send the next settlers. But what if we actually found Martian life? Chris McKay, a renowned astrobiologist, stated that there is life on Mars because we put it there. This implies the forward contamination of the planet. This is the contamination from Earth to Mars. To be able to deal with that, we will need bioethics, which will deal with the assigning of the values of the biological entities. The biggest challenge there will be actually to define extraterrestrial life, because there is no unique definition of life. The MarsNOW proposition for this is that we, rather than to attempt to find an exact definition, we try to define the human conduct towards Mars and its biological entities. This human conduct would be to act with extreme caution during environmental practices, to have a protective approach, and to live in harmony with whatever life we find on Mars. We will not stress enough that this attitude must pervade every aspect of the mission. So now we had why, when, who. Let's go over to a little sad part of the mission. What if it fails? What will happen? So we believe that we should recognize the challenges and possibilities of the failure, and we should make them aware of the public. The challenges and risks will be numerous for such mission and must be mitigated the best we can. The most imminent are the long-duration health effects, the required continuous support, and the support structure for maintaining the longevity. But we think that the fear of failure should not permit the limit of the progress of the technology. Now, let's go back to more positiveness and see what if it actually succeeds. If it succeeds, we will have a Martian culture, and what will be the cultural considerations that will involve such an international Mars mission that may secure the survival of humanity. A the Mars culture will have to decide whether we take all the cultures of the different people that will come on Mars, like their culture from Earth, or if we will just make a brand new one. By doing this, we will have to decide which languages, traditions, beliefs, and mode of contact we will need to live on Mars. So now we have assessed a few important controversial ethical issues. We can go over to some legal challenges that are linked with that. Let's look at some legal concerns. The current state of affairs of the legal framework is underdeveloped, and also the commercial space activity will bring additional legal concerns. So this shows that we need an update of the legal framework. The current legal framework, or current legal regime, consists of 5 United Nations space treaties, such as the Outer Space Treaty, the Antarctic Treaty, the Law of the Sea, or the Moon Treaty. Those treaties have a few controversial segments, such as the province of all mankind principle, first stated in the Outer Space Treaty to prevent conflicts over property in outer space. And also the non-appropriation clause that does not expressly include the exploitation of resources in outer space. Those segments are source of conflict and lead to questions such as, can we benefit from the exploitation of the Martian resources? The MarsNOW team envisions 4 proposals to deal with this issue. The first one is to ignore the non-appropriation clause until it's practical and feasible, and to deal with the problems when they arise. The second proposal is to clarify the point and send through international committee for consideration. The third proposal will be a new declaration where we will require members from spacefaring nations to declare intent to expressly state the non-appropriation clause to be non-applicable to resource mining on celestial bodies. And the fourth proposal will be to propose a new agreement and achieve through international consensus. And so when we decide this, we will need to ensure safe, rational, peaceful and orderly exploitation of Martian resources. We will have to establish an internationally recognized regulatory body. The organization will be responsible for the regulation of the exploitation of resources and will be done throughout an assembly that overcouple committees and councils. To finish the part on the legal concepts, we will identify one more thing. What if the settlers will eventually die on Mars? Of natural cause, or accident, or negligence? When this happens, who will be liable? What would be the legal ramification of the possible wrongful act? The MarsNOW proposal, it proposes to implement stringent regulatory system to ensure the safety of the team, rather than deliberately sending humans to Mars for flags and footprints missions.
Thank you, Severin. To bring it all together, we have considered the ethical challenges involved with sending humans to Mars one way. We have asked some tough questions, such as, should we go, and under what circumstances? We have found that we should go on one-way missions if we have shown the technology and the policy and the long-term support and commitment involved in such a mission. Under the question of who should go, the first settlers who arrive should be a highly interdisciplinary, highly devoted team that is trained and understands the risks and challenges involved. In terms of Martian life and mission impact on Earth, we tried to consider the impact of such a mission both on Mars and on the people of Earth. Rather than trying to define extraterrestrial life, we propose to define human conduct and take a conservative environmental approach which should not only help limit any kind of problems on Mars, but perhaps drive new policies forward here on Earth. For the legal challenges, we have suggested an international regime which can handle some of the ambiguity that we currently see. The Outer Space Treaty and the Non-Appropriation Clause currently limits, or at least is ambiguous in terms of limiting our potential for one-way missions. Now, moving on to other matters such as crew selection and training, I hand the floor over to Jose, who will handle such matters.
Thank you, Dallas. My name is Jose Molina from Puerto Rico. I am an aerospace engineer. And here, in this section, I'll be talking about the team selection and training. So, here we focus on a team selection and training program for the first settlers. This program is based on legacy programs such as the ISS, but we include the Martian element. For example, we'll have a Mars transit analog training in an orbiting platform and Mars surface operation training. These first settlers must have the right stuff for a one-way mission to Mars, just like the Apollo candidates. However, for the further settlers, we were not going to the topic of training and selections, since we believe the criteria will change once the settlement is self-sustainable. First, initially 3 groups of 4 people will be sent to initiate the settlement. In the next 2 launching windows, 2 groups of 8 people will be sent. Approximately 7 years of Earth years will have 28 settlers. So you may ask, where do we get these figures from? In our literature review, we found that Mars Homestead study for one-way missions where the number 12 of initial settlers was found to be sufficient to lay the foundations for a settlement. And again, further settlers will have lower acceptance requirements and may eventually include families and children. So, what is the right stuff? One of the most important selection criteria is based on the physical stresses caused by the lack of privacy, long periods of solitude, and confined environments. Also, the candidates must possess high-level job skills, interdisciplinary skills, show signs of motivation to complete the required mission task, demonstrate social compatibility and emotional stability, and be comfortable alone and within a group. So once the team is selected, they will start training. The MarsNOW team proposes a 3-phase approach for the training. First phase will combine both basic and advanced training under the same schedule. The second phase focuses on flight-specific training required for the Mars transition, and the third phase focuses on Mars survival, settlement, and mission-specific training. Also, the MarsNOW team emphasizes that the importance of roles of robots. It is suggested that the candidates train with robots to increase the functionality of human-robot teams throughout the training phases and the mission. So to start with the first phase, with the basic training, this regime should last around 28 months. It is designed to be a combination of classroom training and various filters for hands-on experiences. The candidate will be introduced to robot-human interaction training, since they will be dealing with various robots during the training and missions. This program focuses on bringing the selected candidates from different backgrounds to the same level of knowledge and skills by covering various range of topics, and with emphasis on Mars science. Also, it's suggested to allocate 12 months for habitat science and maintenance training. Once the candidates finish the basic training, they'll move on to the advanced training. This regime is suggested to last around 24 months. The purpose of the advanced training is to provide practical experience for spaceflight and permanent living on Mars, which include a 12-month training on a Mars habitat simulation. This advanced training will provide using a variety of facilities and equipment, such as neutral buoyancy labs, parabolic flights, and various simulations in virtual reality, and also, of course, a mock-up habitat. Once the candidate finishes the advanced training, they will move on to phase 2. The phase 2 regime is suggested to last around 27 months. Here, they will start spacecraft simulation. This training ensures that the candidates know how to pilot and operate the spacecraft and are able to handle spacecraft malfunctions and emergency. Later, they're going to go into the transit training. Here, they'll be launched to an orbital platform. And this training is suggested to last around 6 to 9 months. This training will ensure that the crew is prepared to recognize and adapt the rapidly changing gravity environment, be aware and employ the microgravity countermeasures, equipment, and techniques. As some of you may know, long spaceflight durations causes changes in the body. For example, muscle atrophy, motion sickness, and changes in the vestibular system. So the problem is when they land, they have to prepare for this. So this training will ensure that the candidates are capable of performing the necessary tasks once they land and to ensure their survival. Basically, once they come from the orbital platform, they will come directly into a mock-up, into a Mars analog, with no ground support crew. Because nowadays, when they come from the ISS, there's a crew welcoming the candidates to ensure that their health. Once they finish the second phase, they will move on to the third phase. This regime is suggested to last around 36 months. Here, the candidates will be exposed to a wide range of EVAs and scientific experiments that will be conducted on Mars. The training will include testing all equipment that will be used during one-way missions to Mars, such as communications equipment, rovers, medical, portable life support system, EVA suits, and other crucial elements. Again, we emphasize that the crew should train with robots, since they're going to work and live with them. With this, I conclude the Mars selection and training campaign.
Thank you, Jose. When considering the selection and training of the first settlers to go on one-way missions, it's important to understand the context with which we currently face. The International Space Station currently involves astronaut training for several months, and we have modeled it as our basis for Mars one-way missions to Mars. The important thing to consider is that missions on board the ISS only run for a duration of approximately 6 months, and the travel to Mars is that long. In order to accomplish all the tasks and be aware of all the risks and dangers, we have taken the ISS training as a guide and added to it to include Mars surface science, habitat training, and included the use of human-robot teams, since robotics will most likely be used for initializing the settlement and an everyday part of their lives. Next, we move on to habitat site selection, and I have a question for you, Jose. We've been talking all about training and ethics and challenges here on Earth, but now, looking at the red planet, where are we going to live?
That is a good question, Dallas. The MarsNOW team proposes to live in the Ophir-Casma region. Why this area? Why not the poles or near the equator, in a crater or a mountain? In this section, I will address that question. Site selection is vital to ensure that all the environment and the factors are suitable for long-term habitat and the survival of humans. Site selection will incorporate 2 elements: landing sites and habitat location. In our literature review, we found a gap. Most, or all, actually all, proposed sites have been with the goal of scientific research and not with the goal of long-term human survival. So with that in mind, we come up with these 3 criteria to identify the suitable landing site. The top level criteria are considered for the identification of a suitable area. The second one are utilized for the identification of specific regions of interest, and the third one is consulted to justify the suitability of possible sites. With this information, the team gathered Mars maps that featured the criteria. The maps were overlaid to produce an image, as you see here, and the area in the red square is the one that satisfied most of the criteria. Here we have a zoom in. This is the Orphigat plasma, and there's two possible sites here for the landing site. This is why the MarsNOW team suggests to send robotic missions to this area to further explore it. This could be the first site proposed prioritizing the survival of humans and not for scientific purposes. As we gather more information on Mars, this area may change, or a better suitable place area could be found. With this, I conclude this section.
Thank you again, Jose. Just to quickly wrap up, the MarsNOW team understands that most of the selection sites for Mars are based on scientific research and opportunities. However, for long-term human settlement, survival will be the most important element. Our process involved taking maps and the information that has been found through previous orbital satellites and robotic missions to the red planet, and understanding the criteria and mapping the criteria which we found most important for a Mars settlement. Once we did so, it became obvious that a settlement in the Ophir-Kasma region near the equator of Mars could be very suitable for a long-term settlement. Now let's move on. We know where we're going to live, so my next question for our next presenter, Cece, is how exactly would one live on a one-way mission on Mars?
Thank you, Dallas. My name is Cece Aniston. I'm an astrophysicist and I'm from Finland. As Dallas just stated, I will be talking about the habitats on Mars as well as some technological issues on Mars. So once the habitation site is determined, it is important to establish a habitation. For a one-way mission habitat, robustness and reliability are important, as the settlement will initiate and expand synchronously with the habitation modules. Some of the basic requirements for the habitat are: it must provide support for the basic human needs, including but not limited to life support system. It must also be safe, protecting the habitats from external threats such as radiation and Martian dust. Finally, it must be large enough to offer enough communal and personal space for the crew. For the short-term habitat, the MarsNOW team proposes a model that is a hybrid between a hard shell and inflatable modules. This type of a hybrid would have several advantages. It would have a lifespan of 10 years. It would protect the crew and equipment from radiation. It would provide good thermal insulation, and it would protect the habitat from vibrations. Here you see 4 different surface habitat models that were found applicable to our project, but it was originally presented in the paper Low-Cost Solutions for Martian Base. I will begin by describing the tunnel outpost. This is dug inside the slope of a mountain. It has windows made of inflatable material. It is low feasibility and moderate cost, but high power model. There is no need for extra periscope-like windows for this. It provides good protection against radiation, as well as good insulation. However, it is not wind-shielded. The next one is the terrace village. This is also dug inside of a mountain. It has a resistant multi-layer membrane covering it and ladder system enabling one to move between the stages. It is moderate feasibility and moderate cost, but requires low amounts of power. It's capable of providing natural light to the habitat. However, there is the need for large roof or deeper construction. The next model is the crater city. As can be seen, it is built inside of a crater with a large roof covering it, its transparent roof providing protection. This model is low feasibility model and it requires low amounts of power. However, it is quite costly. It provides wind shielding, but it is only usable for small craters. The last model is the tubular town. It has inflatable tubular modules partially put underground. It is moderate feasibility and moderate cost, but it requires high power. There is a possibility for transparent modules, but in this case there is need for extra periscope-like windows, and there is need for extra protection for the unburied parts. The MarsNOW team proposes using habitat constructed on a cliff face, as this would provide natural protection for the habitat. Alternatively, a model based on the terrace could be used, as this would provide natural heat and sunlight to the habitat, enabling lowering the power requirements. So we have a place to live. What are we going to be eating on Mars? It would be impossible, as it would be unreliable, very expensive, and just overall not very efficient to bring food from Earth to Mars, even for the initial 12 settlers, never mind a larger group. In fact, a crew of 12 people require over 2,700 kilograms of food. This means that another way of producing food on site would be required. While astronauts have been able to grow plant life in microgravity, genetically modified crops would have several advantages. They would be specifically adapted to grow on Mars, meaning that they would be a more reliable source for food. They would also prevent spread of contamination by leaving the Martian soil untouched, helping with planetary protection. Finally, they would be able to provide fresh food and a balanced nutrition for the Martian. Pharmaceuticals are going to be very important for the Mars colony. This is because they would help to counteract the effects of radiation and microgravity and any other medical considerations on Mars. However, the petrochemicals used on Earth for chemical and medical industry are missing on Mars, which means that the traditional way of producing medicine on site would not be possible. The MarsNOW team proposes to address this issue by using industrial overexpression cell cultures. These genetically engineered cells produce pharmaceutical active compounds during cultivation. When needed, cells could be inserted into bioreactor and grown to required cell density levels, producing the amount of required drug in a few days. While this could be highly usable for a Martian settlement, it should be noted this is still in the development stage. Finally, there's a power requirement for the settlement. This will be defined by the mission design as well as the habitat. There has been several studies on power requirements for different crew sizes, as can be seen. It can also be seen that this is not exactly linearly growing with the crew size. This is partially because there are different mission designs used, but also because with time, technology advances and the power requirements increase. The MarsNOW team proposes using nuclear power on Mars, as would be highly applicable to the Martian conditions. However, it should be noted that with nuclear power, political and safety issues must be considered. I will now pass the floor back to Dallas.
Thank you, Cici. To quickly recap, the MarsNOW team understands that there are many technological challenges involved with living on Mars and sending humans one way. We have tried to look at several technological challenges which may be underrepresented in the current literature. We propose the use of an initial hybrid habitat, which are under development right now and could be used to help the initial settlers. As they live in their hybrid habitat, these initial settlers would work toward building a terrace model, we suggest, as it would provide environmental and engineering advantages. For food production, we suggest the use of genetically modified crops, as they could be specially designed for both the environment and the settlers' needs. Finally, we considered a cell library, a device, a technology which is not currently developed, but could be developed for pharmaceutical purposes for counteracting the negative health effects of living on Mars. Finally, there does not appear to be a consensus in the literature on the power requirements, but this is because different missions involve different considerations and constraints. Speaking of power moves us into our next section on governance. I would like to introduce Ram, as I would like to understand how the people on Mars are going to run themselves when they can provide their own resources.
Thank you, Dallas.
Good afternoon, everybody.
We lost him.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Sorry, good afternoon again. My name is Ramasamy Venugopal. I'm a telecommunications engineer from India, but today I'll be talking social sciences. specifically governance, shows that anything is possible at ISU. So, what is governance? As a word, it is familiar enough to all of us that we don't give it a second thought. But what does it actually mean? One definition we found says that governance consists of all the processes that are required to make an organization function. It includes developing policies, strategies, as well as executing them and also ensuring adherence. Basically, it means that governance affects every part of each one of your lives. We do care about the policies themselves, but not the way they are created or executed, which is also an important part of governance. Why should we care about governance? Well, that is what this section is about. We are talking about governance systems for a future Mars settlement. But you may ask, should we not worry about the technological challenges of going to Mars? Should we not concern ourselves with the million problems we have on Earth first? Well, the short answer is this. Governance systems have changed very little over hundreds of years. It is difficult to change them, and let's face it, we don't have the incentive to change them. A part of our social problems can actually be traced back to ineffectual governance. Even if our technological systems are perfect and very advanced, if our governance systems are not, then our civilization is doomed to fail. This is where a Mars settlement comes in. When humanity finally decides to go to Mars and settles on Mars, we have two options. We either use the same systems as on Earth, transplant them to Mars, or we go for new, innovative forms of governance that we should start thinking about and start developing right now. Although this might seem like a roundabout way of doing this, we, the MarsNOW team, think that this is a very important and useful spin-off of settling Mars. Finally, due to the international nature of such a mission, we hope that any new governance system developed will also be international in nature. So what forms of governance systems are we proposing? You see here a picture that represents all of the Earth systems of governance that we have today. This shows the variation of time over the age of the Martian settlement, and this shows the spectrum of possible governance systems we have today. As you may note, initially in the beginning of the settlement, when there are very few members and when it is heavily dependent on Earth, we expected to take an authoritarian form of governance where power is focused in the hands of one or few people. Later, as the settlement grows in size and as it moves towards autonomy and self-sustainability, we expected to take more democratic forms of governance as seen in various countries on Earth today. But one thing to note is this whole premise is based on Earth systems of governance. There is no reason for Mars to copy Earth. They can develop new systems of governance that nobody even has thought of right now. Moving on to policies for such a settlement on Mars. Well, here we highlight a few policies that we think are important for a Martian settlement. I have to say that we do not provide a complete solution, but rather throw the spotlight, so to speak, on Mars and governance systems for Mars. We thought it would be good to start with something most of you here are familiar with, hopefully, the International Space Station, the ISS, and compare it to a Martian settlement in terms of policies for resource management. As you can see, the objective of the ISS is scientific, while for a Mars settlement it will be survival. That is not to say survival is not important for the astronauts on the ISS, of course it is. But those astronauts always have the option of coming back to Earth in case of emergencies, and the ISS is pretty well supplied regularly, which might not be the case for a Mars settlement. This difference in objectives is actually reflected in how the resources will be distributed in both the cases. For the ISS, the astronauts can afford to not share the resources, while we strongly advise any settlers on a Mars settlement to share as much as they can. Finally, for decision making, the astronauts on the ISS not only depend on Earth for their supplies, but also for any instructions which they receive every day. For a Mars settlement, we advise the settlers to be as autonomous, as independent as possible, make as many decisions on their own, because The main objective of this settlement is to establish a second home for humanity. What about resource management policies specifically for the settlement? Well, there was a paper published in early 2014 that performed a mathematical analysis of the reasons for societal collapse. They found that in order to avoid societal collapse, there should be an equitable distribution of resources, number one, and number two, there should be an allocation of resources restricted to sustainable levels, meaning demand should always be less than production. We have used these two tenets in framing our policies for resource management on the Martian settlement. For example, all the resources that we take for granted here on Earth, such as food, water, even the air you breathe, is limited on Mars. So we propose that there be equitable supply and distribution of these resources, as well as things like power, even the hardware that is to be used on a Martian settlement. What about freedom of information? Well, we propose a totally transparent information policies with restrictions on private information. As for religion, it is a sensitive topic, but one thing we do recommend is not forbidding religion, because it can be very important by providing spiritual sustenance during tough times, well, for most people anyway. We also have policies for conflict management, how to deal with crime, and emergencies and disaster mitigation strategies that are all explained in detail in my report.
Thank you, Ram. Issues such as governance seem to be way too far in the future for some. We have not even landed humans on Mars, and already we're starting to try to understand how they would govern themselves and what decisions they would make. In order for us to consider the evolution of a Martian settlement, we believe that we should consider these governance issues and policies now, as they will evolve over time and perhaps will lead to a beneficial design of a settlement on Mars, and understand its importance for a one-way mission to Mars.
Thank you, Dallas. Yes, outreach is important, but why? Well, especially for space, where missions are usually very expensive, although that is starting to change right now, and where missions are mostly publicly funded, which again might change in the near future. Outreach is important because it is funded by taxpayers' money. And when you consider something like a human one-way mission to Mars, settling on Mars, then it will definitely be a very long-term mission requiring support from Earth for a long time. This requires consistent level of funding, which means there needs to be public support for such a mission, which in turn emphasizes the importance of outreach. The public loves spending on space, right? Now, they don't like spending on space. Well, for four main reasons. They say that money should be spent on things that benefit people on Earth. Somehow they think that space does not benefit them. Wrong perception among the public. Then they think that there are too many problems that exist here on Earth that need to be solved first before thinking about or funding space. They also think that humanity cannot be trusted with the space environment given what we have done to Earth. And finally, they say that spin-off technologies developed from space do not really apply to individuals. This shows what the public perception is. A survey conducted in the United States revealed that most of the US citizens believe the NASA budget to be 2.43% of the total federal budget, when in reality it is just 0.5%. When given the right information, most of the respondents of the survey, almost 70% of them, were open to increasing the budget of NASA up to 1%. This small increase, well, small in terms of percentage, but it's actually a big amount, would allow for new missions to be funded, such as going to Mars. This shows what is possible by changing public perception. Affordability is also key. In a recent workshop conducted at the George Washington University a few weeks ago on affording human explorations on Mars, they found that a mission can be deemed to be affordable if its objectives are important enough. We say that by this definition, a one-way mission to Mars is affordable, even though it might be expensive, because it has the most important objective, that of establishing a second home for humanity. The bottom line for outreach is this: we have to keep a wide global audience, because of the international nature of the mission, interested in and excited by a very long duration human mission. How do we propose to do this? Well, our team has outlined 3 basic methods of outreach. Number 1, interactive games. We think that this is a very important medium, recent one, although that has been overlooked by most agencies. Some of you might have heard of the new space game, the Kerbal Space Program. That is becoming quite famous, I might add, where players can create their own space agencies and learn to fly rockets and play with the orbital mechanics. We propose a similar game for our situation called the Life on Mars game, where players can simulate how it feels to live and work on Mars through a video game. Number 2, we suggest the use of short-term public analogs, where members of the public can live in analog sites on Earth for short durations of time to again experience what the astronauts on Mars feel like every day. Then finally, we think that milestone events are very important to sustain high levels of interest due to the long nature of the mission. We propose the joint celebrations between Earth and Mars communities for certain major events on Earth or Mars, so as to keep high levels of interest in this mission.
Thank you, Ram. To quickly recap, MarsNOW team understands and emphasizes the effects of outreach and education in supporting a one-way mission to Mars. We understand that the public generally underestimates space budgets, and we recognize the importance of educating them and keeping them informed on the exciting challenges, opportunities, and benefits of a one-way mission. Our proposal is to build on currently existing outreach programs used by space agencies all over the world by adding interactive games, public analogs, and milestone events. These 3 options will help keep people interested and connected with the crew on the one-way mission to Mars. This moves us into our recommendations and our conclusion. MarsNOW team understands that there is much literature on settling humans on Mars, on sending humans to Mars, but we are looking at those that would be required for settlement. The first recommendation, we must demonstrate the technology for return missions. The technology required for sending humans to, landing on, and living on Mars should be developed before any one-way mission is designed or implemented. We suggest doing this through several shorter-term return missions. The next is we recommend settling currently open issues in space law, including the ambiguity that exists in the Outer Space Treaty, as well as others, over the exploitation of celestial resources. For any one-way mission to succeed, we are going to need to develop and use resources on Mars, and we need to settle any of the conflicts which could possibly occur. For this, we propose creating an international legal regime for Mars, which will be specifically tasked with handling the licensing, the jurisdiction, and the liability issues which will occur on such a large, long-term mission. Next, we propose a conservative approach for crew selection and training. For crew selection, we deem to focus on 2 very key factors: the psychological aspects of such a long-term mission and working with a crew or a team for the duration of your life, and the interdisciplinary skills that will be required. The settlement will be small, and everyone must have multiple skills to help out and support the settlement. Next, using an image overlay process where we looked at the criteria for a settlement, we decided that the Ophir-Kasma region would be an optimal place for a long-term settlement on Mars. The initial settlers will land using using the technology afforded to them, and we propose the use of a hybrid habitat, as they are in development at this time and could be used to help them and sustain them until they begin construction of a permanent habitat. Once again, we stress the permanent habitat should be set in the valley walls to provide environmental protection, engineering and mechanical support, and we propose a terrace model based on our literature study that we have seen so far. Next, we consider that governance issues should be considered early in the mission planning and should be evaluated as the mission evolves over time. As people on Mars begin to be able to provide for themselves, they will want and be able to make their own decisions. Questions of how they govern themselves, what choices they make, and how they can make those choices will greatly change the interaction between Earth and Mars. And we propose that these governance systems should be considered not only for the people of Mars, but perhaps the new, fresh perspectives could help drive development of governance systems on Earth. Our final recommendation is that we believe that this mission would require strong global public support. It is a big mission with a long timescale, and it will require the support of everyone and anyone involved for funding, for technology, and for commitment. This moves us into our conclusion. Considering the environmental impacts and the social dangers and the political ones, MarsNOW team believes that settling Mars is vital for the survival of humankind on a great timescale. Having our entire species on one planet is risky at best. The issues uncovered by the MarsNOW team are challenging. We looked at some of the underdeveloped aspects, but even those that have been developed through the literature are still not complete. The technology required for sending humans to Mars is still being developed and will need to be further developed if a one-way mission is to be considered. However, we believe that the one-way missions should be seriously considered because they aid in the pursuit of human motivations. Humanity seems to want to advance their species, search for answers, and ultimately keep ourselves surviving and improving. And one-way missions allow us to sustain this effort rather than doing so one return mission at a time. In order for one-way missions to be seriously considered or implemented, we believe that we should start looking at these challenges, perhaps follow some of the recommendations we've made here today, and to start now. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you. I'd like to call down some of the MarsNOW representatives who will help in the question and answer period and pass the floor over to our ISU faculty, especially Chris.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Congratulations to the team, both those who presented, those who are on stage now to be quizzed, and all the other members. A very clear and effective presentation. It's now our turn to ask you some questions, and I think I will start at the top with ISU's president, Walter Peters. And get him to pose you some questions.
Yes, thank you. You answered already a lot of my questions. It was you looked at the right topics. One of the questions which you touched upon, but which I didn't hear, how much is this going to cost?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. When considering any kind of a space mission, cost is always a leading driver and constraint. I believe I'll take the answer to this one. MarsNOW considered many aspects of the affordability and the design which would drive the cost of the mission. However, we are unable to find any material which provided a consensus. We found that missions were increased in funding over time and that there was no clear model that suggested it. There were several models that have been proposed recently, but it all depends on the design and the implementation. However, considering the long time scale, we believe that a one-way mission, without giving an actual number to it, would obviously be the most expensive endeavor of humankind, as it would require all the technology and commitment seen as in a typical space operation, but extended over several decades.
Excellent diplomatic answer. I have one, I think your comparison which you did in the beginning is a very good one, Dallas. If you look at people going to Australia, I have nothing against that, I'm using the comparison as well. There is one difference though. The people going to Australia, their grandchildren, they could come back to Europe. Do you think, or does anybody think that grandchildren who are born in 2 generations on Mars will be able to come back to Earth?
That's an excellent question. So for those out there, the question is, the people who went to Australia or to the Americas on the one-way missions, they had the option of returning home at a later time. The specific example is that perhaps their grandchildren or great-grandchildren could return home. And the question is whether or not future generations of Martian settlers would be able to return to Earth. This question comprises 2 very specific and large fields, namely the technology involved in returning, as well as the medical and biological effects of living on Mars long term. Based on the research we have seen, the first, namely let's focus on the technology, we believe that one-way missions should only be conducted when return missions have been validated. So technologically, we believe that they would have the ability to return. Their intention would be to stay and develop a settlement, but in case of emergency or other factors, they would be able to return. In terms of the long-term human physiological effects, the answer is still unclear. Humans have not lived beyond the low Earth orbit for any period of time. We have gone to the moon and come back, but we have not gone any farther or lived in deep space or on other planets. We have seen changes, as mentioned earlier, in the crew selection and training that occur only after 6 months. So the MarsNOW team believes that after several return missions are conducted to the red planet, that perhaps the development of pharmaceuticals and countermeasures could be used to return people home, and perhaps should be a major consideration before even conducting a one-way mission.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. That was a very good presentation, and much improved. You make our job a little bit difficult to find suitably difficult questions to ask you. Nonetheless, I'll give it a try. It's a quick question. Could you please go to slide number 24, please? That to me appeared to come a little bit out of the blue. I would like you to go now to slide number 57, please. Because you're dealing with a governance system, and I was a little bit... You're proposing this General Assembly model that you have put at the very beginning. At which stage of this? How do you relate? It wasn't easy finding a difficult question, but I did my best. How would you relate this sort of governance, general governance model, with this more, shall I say, not evolutionary, but this more adaptable through time, as you portrayed it there? Is this something that will come up at the beginning, in the initial phase? Is this something that will come up later on when you're dealing with a more autonomous? And at which point, if I can have the second question, at which point are you envisaging that you will cut off from the current governance system of the ISS type, for example, where you have the earthbound governance, in a sense, having a memorandum that dictates operations? So that's not an easy question, but I think you of many other teams that have looked into this subject might be able to give us some insight. I'm not sure about the answer, but at least some insight. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. To reiterate, the question involves our proposal for an international outer space administration to handle some of the legal aspects involved in a Mars mission, and examining them with reference to this diagram, which expresses the governance system on Mars and how it evolves over time. To handle the answer to this question, I would like to pass the floor over to Ron.
Thank you, Dallas. So the first slide that we showed with the outer space administration, that is on Earth. So we established that administration on Earth to prepare humans to go to Mars in order to concern ourselves with the legal questions of going to Mars. So that is before establishing the settlement. That is kind of an international cooperation for outer space administration, something like the UN. And this shows the governance systems that we will use on Mars. And like you rightly said, in the beginning, we propose to use something like the ISS model, where astronauts or settlers on Mars will follow instructions from the Earth. So it will be like an authoritarian rule. And then over time, it will develop to something completely different. We keep it as an adaptable form.
In the hands of business guy, of course, it's
Thank you for this. I think there's a lot of food for thought into this. I have a few more points, but we can discuss this offline. But anyway, well done. I think this is a very tricky subject. It's not something that can easily be dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the nice presentation, and also I understand the so much improvement was done. Thank you. Thank you. And my question regarding the training, maybe the slide about let's see, I'm not sure I do it. Well, the period for training would need maybe almost 10 years. It seems a little bit longer. And also I like to hear the idea, what kind of the members are selected, and what kind of group will be trained as a team.
Thank you. The question involves crew selection and training, understanding the longer duration we've proposed for the training, and trying to understand exactly what kind of crew or team would be chosen for one-way missions to Mars. To handle the answer to this question, I'd like to pass the floor over to Jose Molina.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I'm going to answer the first part of the question, which is the training, and the second part I will pass the floor to Cici. So as for the training, we use the ISS as a model. The ISS uses three phases, I guess. So they have the basic, the advanced, and then specific. So for a 6-month mission, for the basic, it's 16 months. For the advanced, it's 12 months. And the space flight specific, it might range from 6 months to a couple of years, depending on the mission. So here we suggest to add 12 months to include the 12 months to the advanced, to the basic and advanced, to include the Mars elements. Then the phase 3 and additionally we add the Mars transit on phase 2. So that is 27 months. That's a lot of time. And then phase 3 is another 36 months, if I'm not mistaken. How much? So the question is, how much do you have to train to survive, in a different planet? Since these are numbers taken from the ISS, or based on the ISS, probably 10 years should be enough for the first settlers. As this settlement becomes sustainable, probably the criteria of training will evolve, and be less. So even families and children will be able to travel to Mars. As for the selection, I'll pass the floor to Cici.
Thank you for the question. As stated in the presentation, we would have 28 initial settlers. The first group would be 12 settlers, which would be chosen to be interdisciplinary, which is different from the current astronaut selection, where often the astronauts are experts in their own fields. Why this is different is because a settlement on Mars would require people to be able to do different skills. You might be a construction worker putting up a habitat, engineer. Sometimes you need to be able to do medicine, geophysics, and so on. So we would suggest that people would be chosen that are highly capable in different fields, but perhaps not experts in one certain field. We also think it would be good to have intercultural group and both genders. We haven't set a certain age limit, but we did discuss in the final report that a certain lower age limit should be considered at least. And also there's ethical issues on sending people who would have children, for example. For the later settlers, as we would hope to establish a permanent settlement, one day we would probably have to consider families and so on. But this would be so far in the future. We didn't go into detail into this in the final report, as most likely the situation would have changed largely at that time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Many thanks. As Nakahara-san pointed out, you made massive progress in the last 2 days since the rehearsal on Tuesday. One question and one suggestion. Suggestion first. Some of you will be interning this summer at NASA Ames Research Center in Moffett Field, California. And my understanding is that you will be formally presenting this team project to NASA colleagues. Now, my suggestion is to invite our friend Dr. Chris McKay. I absolutely promise you he'll be interested in your work, and he will engage with you in discussion and debate. My question, in fact, relates to clarification. Would you please go to slide number 46, please? Because from slide number 46 to slide number 49, there was something that was unclear to me. When you talk about low feasibility, what do you mean?
Thank you for the suggestion and the question. The question was, looking at these slides and long-term habitats, we stated levels of feasibility on the habitat. For this question, I would like to pass the floor to Alicia.
Good afternoon. My name is Alicia and I'm a physicist. So low feasibility means that it will require a lot of different technologies in order to build those habitats. So to bring all the technologies to Mars will be really difficult in terms of mass and structure. So that's why it's low feasible.
Well, can I suggest if you're giving this presentation again, perhaps reword that, because it was unclear to me, and yet I'm familiar with your work. Many thanks. Thank you.
Oh, thanks so much for your presentation. I completely agree with my colleagues. Improvement is unbelievable. It was only 48 hours, maybe without sleeping. So another congratulation. I would like to follow your suggestions to provide a better connection with outreach and advertising. You are lucky. We have to celebrate today team project number 10, which was devoted to Mars in ISU. So in that case, I'm kind of very, very important day to you. Of course, I have many questions about low feasibility, etc. Because these examples are, of course, oriented on at least 300 people on Mars, but not on 28. And good suggestion for 28 was presented by you in the first 5 slides. It's a simplified things. I have one small question, but maybe interesting to you. On this week, at the beginning of this week, NASA officially announced first time, that in frame of flight with a Curiosity, beautiful machine, they didn't provide complete deactivation of bacteria. And about 65 types of bacteria were delivered to Mars. My question to you, you suggested to have one-way ticket to our bodies. As I'm a very bad medical guy, I never had education, but my impression is that inside of our body we have order of magnitude billions of different bacteria. What's your impression in that case? How successful will be your efforts, especially from medical viewpoint, and have some kind of medication, if against one bacteria on Earth, majority of big companies spend 5-10 years to find countermeasure against disease? Have a look now, we have also some kind of this birds disease. 2 years, all companies try to find countermeasure, didn't find. Maybe our bacteria also will have a mutation. In that case, how to, not to prevent, what's your ideas how to provide a health, our, not suicides, but our volunteers on the Mars, except your very exotic ways, so-called, to have some special factory.
Thank you very much for the question. It's a very important one and is obviously integral to a one-way mission to Mars. How exactly would human beings survive over the great time scale? In order to handle this question, I would like to pass the floor to our medical expert, Robert.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert, and I'm a medical doctor from Croatia in Italy. Thank you for your question. It's a very interesting question, and the answer is multifaceted. So far we have no evidence of life on Mars, and even if we did find Martian life, it would be very unlikely that those specific microorganisms would in any way negatively affect humans or any organism from Earth, because the mechanisms with which pathogenicity evolves is over a very long time and in close contact. This means that 2 species would have to be in close contact for thousands of years for one to adapt to the other and to be able to infect it. And as for the bacteria we bring from Earth, we would deal with the known diseases by producing drugs on Mars using our proposed cell libraries. And for unknown diseases, those would represent contingencies which are a risk in any space mission. And frankly, we believe that's a risk which will have to be accepted by at least the initial settlers. And as technology improves over time, maybe more medical facilities could be constructed on Mars to deal with bigger issues.
Thank you so much. You had one very correct word, risk. You see, so every time we should take risk of this mission. Thanks once more, and good luck.
Okay, I have a couple of questions for you. The first one, you discussed the use of genetically modified plants and crops. Did you consider the use of genetically modified humans?
That's an interesting question. The question involves whether or not we considered genetically modifying humans in order to be more suitable for one-way missions to Mars. It was a topic which we had not fully addressed or covered, but we did consider it when we looked at both the ethical and the technological parts of living on Mars. There are several advantages, of course. There are extreme environmental differences of living on the red planet, including radiation and microgravity effects, and perhaps genetically modifying people so that they are already prepared to live on Mars could be a good idea. There are a lot of ethical concerns around genetic screening, and there would be even more concerns over genetic modification of people. For those reasons, and due to the scope of our project, we did not consider that any more than the initial discussion.
Okay, thank you. A clear answer. Next question to do with the power. You decided to go with a nuclear power source for reasons that I can understand. However, if this is ultimately to become completely autonomous, that means future power systems, nuclear power systems, would have to be fueled from resources which located on Mars. Are there radioactive materials on Mars that can be extracted to form the basis of future nuclear power systems, or would that always be a sort of lifeline back to Earth? In which case, it's very difficult to be independent completely if you're depending on somebody on another planet to keep the lights on.
It's a very interesting question. It involves the power and long-term stability of a Martian settlement. In our analysis of the energy studies conducted through various, mostly NASA is listed here, but others listed in our report, there are many trade-offs of different types of power usage. For the engineering factors, as much as it would be challenging, we proposed a nuclear power system. But, as Professor Welch has pointed out, we also want the settlement to be autonomous and independent of Earth. It is likely that several other techniques could be developed over time, but assuming that nuclear power is approved and used, and assuming that the settlement eventually becomes autonomous, we still believe that there would be communication and trade between Earth and Mars. It is a technological limitation in the fact that we do not think that the Martian settlement could be completely autonomous with regards to this generation of nuclear power, but perhaps new technologies or positive communication and trade between the planets would sustain the settlement.
I think that's it's a very nice viewpoint. It's possibly a slightly idealistic one. We only have to look at the issues with gas supply in Europe at the moment to see that sort of a commercial relationship, when times get difficult, can be used as a way of applying pressure. And I would love to think that this future Mars colony, Mars settlement, that the people back on Earth wouldn't ever say, oh, well, if you don't do what we say, it could be a bit difficult with the next sort of power supply coming to you. So I think to be truly autonomous, you have to be resource independent. A trade between equals is one thing. Trade between a client and a bigger power is a slightly different thing. And then my last question for you really relates to robots. I can see again the attraction of robots, particularly in the early stages of the settlement, to multiply the capabilities of the humans. But of course, robots in particular are complicated mechanisms. These would be robots designed and built on Earth. And I'm wondering, have you considered the risk of what happens if the robots go wrong? Will they be able to fix them? Will they be able to build new robots? Or will they end up going back to rather basic technology? Certainly potentially electromechanical, but not actually sort of your robot friend who will help you with the difficult tasks.
Thank you for the question. The question addresses the other half of the Martian settlement, namely the robotic crew or the robotic settlers that we mentioned. We stressed human-robot crews in the crew selection and training and for living and working on the Red Planet. The question involves what to do or how difficult or easy would it be to correct any issues or problems that occur with our robotic companions. The answer is that when trying to look at what is needed for Mars, we tried to understand exactly what would be needed for setting up the initial settlement and then for providing for long-term stability. Robots were seen as important in various forms and various levels of sophistication. Using an arm to move a simple piece of material is considered a robot. Using some kind of medical database to interface with to assess problems is another type of robot that could be used. And part of the resupply would be in maintenance or equipment or spare parts or perhaps even new robots. So we consider that as problems develop with the robots, they would have perhaps interchangeable parts, they would be as simple in design as possible, and for the initial stages, when it is vitally important, there would be a constant resupply of parts and of equipment needed to sustain the robotic crew of the Mars settlement.
Okay, thank you for the answer. I would probably invite you to consider that again, if the Mars settlement is dependent on Earth for particular high technology items, that mitigates a little bit against potential autonomy. And so if you're designing for early autonomy, you want to think very clearly about the transition from being reliant on terrestrial, robots to whatever can be built, on Mars, and that's an area that, because otherwise, again, it can be used as a way of, controlling things. But anyway, with that, we're up to time. So thank you very much to MarsNOW for your presentation and all your hard work throughout the year leading up to today. Congratulations go with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time and attention here and across the world. And I would like to thank the MarsNOW team, both standing here and sitting in the audience, for all your hard work this year. Thank you.
And so for those people watching out on the internet, we will now have a short period while the second team project gets set up.